It works. Is that too loud? All right. I'd like to welcome everyone to the first Spring Literary Festival. This is sponsored by the Creative Writing students, but we have many more than Creative Writing students in the audience, and I'd like to thank all of you for coming, for participating. After this was scheduled, I saw a segment, or heard a segment on NPR about the revival of coffee houses. Anybody see that, hear that? Poetry readings in coffee houses. So I want you to know that Thomas Nelson is in the avant-garde of the intellectual literary advancement. Yay! Before we get started, I'd like to thank a few people. I'd like to thank Donna D'Amelio, who's here. Where is Donna? Right here. She did the wonderful flyer and the program for this event. Her artistic talent equals her literary. Thank you. And I'd like to thank Marlene Waters working the video. This will be preserved forever and will be shown to incoming students as they stand in line waiting to get registered. So you'll be famous. And I'd like to thank Elsie, who's hiding outside there, for helping me organize it, and Thurman London, who will be with us later, for helping set up everything. So I appreciate it all. And we'll just get started today. Our Master of Ceremonies is Michael Steik, a student right here. And we'll be following. He'll be calling you up basically according to the white sheet, the agenda. We'll follow that, except the first person on it, Steve Tisdale, is not here, so we'll just start with the second person immediately. And I think the procedure, because we have so many wonderful volunteers, Steve is here. Late as usual. We have so many wonderful volunteers that if everyone reads for 5 minutes, we'll be here 4.5 hours. So we'll have to just kind of keep things moving, and I think we'll be able to. So when your name is called, come up and maybe introduce yourself, say a few words about your work, and then read it, okay? Whether it's several poems or a longer literary work. All right? So I'd like to start with Stephen Tisdale, who will be first. Steve, incidentally, won first place and third place in this year's literary contest for poetry.
Hi. Hello. Okay. Well, okay. All right. Huh. I don't recommend anybody do this. This is kind of scary, actually. But okay. I'm going to read 3 selections today. Some that I think are my favorites. I enjoy reading them. One won third place in the poetry competition. Was it this summer, I believe, or last summer? It's entitled, the first piece I'm going to read is entitled A Famous Hangout, I'll Have You Know. And I guess just to preface it, I wanted to avoid, when writing, sometimes you get into a rut, sometimes a really bad block, a writer's block, and you sort of feel like when you're writing, you don't want to sell yourself out to the cliche when you're writing something. Like you want to avoid the cliche when you're writing. This poem, it's the best I can really explain it, is about avoiding the cliche. Famous hangout, I'll have you know. I might walk out of the house today, but first a good stare through the cold pane. There are the coils of wind that spiral around the downed bird in the stiff grass, and the trees that curtsy for the tip of my flowing pen. Again. Hey, there's another one of those poets parking across the street. He leaps from his stanza and doesn't pay the meter, all with that typical tear in his eye and smirk on his lips, sorrows tattooed on his inked fingertips. He comes to hide with all the others in my yard behind willows weeping, a famous hangout. Or in the desperate reds of a dying rose bush, all starving for something dramatic, no doubt. So I flow like rhyme out my door and clutch the shrieking bird, talk to it like the woodwinds, lay at the percussion of my chattering teeth, and I'd swear that the wind moves like the scribbling of 1,000 pens. And my next selection is more about family, and there's certain stories that come down through generation after generation of family, and it sort of links you with your past. And this is what I wanted to write about, how I am like my father, and my father is like my grandfather, and it's a poem about death, and being curious about death, and knowing that the inevitable is there, and trying to deal with that. This is entitled Branches. Why are old people's ears so big? Is it because all they had was radio? And I'm sure that in my grandmother's deaf ears she remembers big band and how young limbs broke into dance. Those songs sparkled, those songs were hot, she always says. There was a fire in Morgantown, West Virginia. The smell of smoke and burned flesh loomed on the hills. A tunnel collapsed in Monongalia. Maybe the miners, my great-grandfather, my great-uncles, drilled too deep. Maybe a song of diamonds shook the mine. It is said that some saw the ghosts, the shadows shedding their charred skin, their shattered bones, to run naked through the woods, to spin in the blue flame of midnight, to dance with the sugar maple, the butternut, the crooked oak. O family tree, are we captured? Are we encased in time, dangling from brittle branches? And to where do all the shadows go, Grandma? Do they hold hands? Do they embrace each other to make up the coal black night? Do they lay themselves before children playing in the sunlight, chasing them until dusk? Do they hide in the fortune teller's carnival tent, whispering to her until the coming of morning? And it comes to me like the morning, that there must be paths, there must be lines on earth to follow. Consider the busted knuckles of the oak, a child's dancing shadow. And if the length of the lines in an open palm tell the future, then surely some will hold their hands away from themselves, as if to ward off the coming of death or fire. Thank you. The next piece I'm going to read is, I don't know how to preface. Well, I sort of noticed that, not noticed I suppose, but that I was always very curious why, ever when I was little, I used to say, well, to my mother when she would read me stories, I would say, well, whatever happened to these people? Were they really rich? Were the writers really rich? Or the poets? What did they do? And she said that most of them died as strangers to most, and were viewed as being very strange. She even told me, I believe John Clare, a really great poet, was locked away because people thought his poetry was so different and strange. And I thought about that, and it sort of seems that, or to me, or my view, that poetry or people who view things differently are sometimes perceived as being vulgar or strange or different when they cut across the norm of the way people think. And so I sort of toyed with the idea about what is vulgar and what is strange. And I came up with this poem. It's called Voyeur. When peering through the glassy pane of his wits, the poet is a sort of peeping Tom, getting off on watching the world in its nakedness. He's even a kind of well-endowed street wretch, going around flashing people with bare truth and diction. But curiously wandering in his mortal nakedness, he is most like an infant who touches everything with new fingers, naming with innocent tongue the world. that slowly turns away, blushing at his unveiled soul, as if he were strange or vulgar, as if to ask death to come dress him in its voice of dark soil. Okay, I think my 5 minutes is up. Who's next?
Thank you, Stephen. And now our next reader will be Miss Donna D'Amelio. Donna?
Hi, my name is Donna D'Amelio, and I'm a writer for children. And the story I'm going to tell today is called Abernathy and the Terrible Wind. So please just pretend that you're 6 or 8 years old, and I hope you enjoy it. Once upon a time, there lived in a small village in the heart of a valley a miller and his not-so-brave son Abernathy. The village was a peaceful place where year after year was much like the last. During the summer, a southern breeze warmed the countryside, and in the autumn, a cool wind from the north blew down from the mountains. The farmers of the village planted fields and fields of wheat. When the north wind blew down off the mountains, the wheat became as gold as the sun. The fields were harvested, and the wheat was brought to the mill. The miller and his son were kept very busy grinding the wheat into a fine white flour. Abernathy and his father worked long hours, but they didn't mind. The money they earned from their labors would buy them food for the winter. And so it was on just such an autumn day, when the cool winds blew down from the mountains, that the miller opened his window. He had just taken a deep breath, enjoying the fresh morning air, when whoosh, a terrible wind suddenly invaded his house. The wind tore through the room like a hurricane. It whipped past the curtains, blew over a chair, and almost tore the miller's pajamas off. The wind blew past the mill, chasing leaves down the cobbled streets of the village. It raced past the church and roared past the houses. It blew clothes off clotheslines and sent hats tumbling over rooftops. The people of the village were so afraid they hid in their homes and trembled. But not the miller. He wasn't afraid. He shook his fist at the wind. "Out of my mill," he shouted out. The wind just blew harder, in and around every nook and cranny of the flour mill. It wasn't long before the miller and his son were both covered with white flour. Everything in the village was covered in a layer of flour, too. The miller called a town meeting. "Something has to be done about this terrible wind," he said. "If someone does not stop the wind from blowing flour all over the village, there will not be any flour left. And if there is no flour, not only will there be no flour to bake your bread, but my son and I will have no money to buy food for the winter." But not one brave man stepped forward. "Then I will have to send my son Abernathy," said the miller. "Your son?" a farmer shouted as several villagers laughed. "He is afraid of his own shadow." "He may not be very brave," answered the angry miller, "but he is smart. He'll find a way to stop this terrible wind." The next morning, the miller called his son. "Abernathy," he shouted over the howling wind, "stop hiding in the corner and come here." Abernathy crawled out of his hiding place and stood before his father. "I am sending you out into the world to find the cause of this terrible wind." "But father," Abernathy said, "what can I do to stop the wind? I am only a boy." "Boy or not, there is no one else," the miller answered. "I know you are not brave, my son, but you must go. You must find a way to stop this wind. If you cannot, we will be ruined." Abernathy did not want to go, but he couldn't stand to see his father so sad. "I will go," Abernathy replied. In a large bag, Abernathy packed enough food and water to last him several weeks. He threw on his heavy coat and put on his winter boots. Then, waving goodbye to his father, he gathered what little courage he could and was on his way. Abernathy traveled far up the valley. With each step he took, the wind blew harder and harder. His father's words were the only thing that kept him going. Finally, exhausted from fighting the wind all day, he lay down and slept. "Get up, you fool of a boy," a craggy voice shouted. "What are you doing sleeping in front of my house?" "Who? What?" Abernathy jumped up and stared wide-eyed at a strange old woman in front of him. "I am Eldwitch, and this is my house." She pointed a crooked finger in his face. "And unless you can tell me why you are sleeping here without my permission, I will turn you into a bat." Abernathy stuttered, drawing his coat close to him. "My father has sent me out into the world to find the cause of this terrible wind." The witch cackled with glee. "I am the cause of the terrible wind," she said. "I captured the north wind as he passed my house. He did so without my permission. So I threw him into the cellar and locked the door. Now he must do my bidding as I see fit. But you must let him out, Abernathy explained. I will never let him out, Eldridge replied. He will blow and blow until it pleases me to let him stop. And as for you, Abernathy fell to his knees. Please, please, he begged, do not harm me. Please, said the witch as she stroked her long, pointed chin. Perhaps I could use someone like you. My house needs some cleaning. I can do that, Abernathy said. We shall see, the witch said. You can start with my cauldron. It has been a long time since it has been scrubbed, and then you can sort out my potions. In preparing my spells, I've mixed the toadstools with the bat wings and the lizard tongues with the snail slime. Abernathy shivered, but he went straight to work. He worked very hard. He scrubbed the goo out of the bottom of the cauldron, and he dusted the spiders off the shelves. All the while, he kept a sharp eye out for the cellar door and where Eldridge kept the North Wind prisoner. He had just about given up the search when he tripped over a tattered old rug. He lifted the edge to straighten it out, and there beneath it, he found a trap door. A small breeze squeezed through the cracks and tickled his ears. Help me, it seemed to say. Abernathy dropped the rug and stepped back. The wind's down there, and I let him out. Eldridge will turn me into a bat, he said, suddenly frightened. No, it was better to leave things alone, and so he went back to cleaning. That night, Abernathy did not sleep well. He dreamed of his father. You must stop this terrible wind, his father said. If you do not, we will be ruined. Abernathy woke from his dream. He knew that no matter what the witch did to him, he must find a way to free the wind and save his father and the mill. So that morning, before the witch woke up, he did a little rearranging. I want you to sweep the floors this morning, Eldridge said, stretching lazily. She handed Abernathy her old broom. He swished it around and around, making a huge cloud of dust. Stop sweeping, Eldridge shouted. I cannot make my spells with all this dust. I know an easier way to get rid of the dust, Abernathy said. I'm sure you do, Eldridge replied. But you can't fool me. You're up to something. I would never, Abernathy stammered. It's just, well, if you're such a powerful witch, why don't you cast another spell in the wind? You could make him blow the dust out of your house. Eldridge said, rubbing her chin. How clever of me to have thought of it. Hand me some lizard tails and frogworts. I'll have a spell whipped up in no time. Abernathy handed over the potions and stood back, watching and hoping. Eldridge stood over her cauldron. She pinched in a little of this and a little of that, saying as she stirred, Icka, Icka, north wind blow, clean my house from head to toe. Rid this place of all its dust and do it now in one big gust. Abernathy waited. Eldridge waited, but nothing happened. Why isn't my spell working? The witch shouted, stamping her feet. Abernathy hid behind a chair. I don't know, he stammered, but he knew why the spell hadn't worked. He'd taken special care to rearrange the labels on all the potions. There was no telling what that old witch had put in her cauldron. Suddenly, a terrible odor filled the room. Green goo poured over the sides of the big black cauldron and spilled on the floor. Oh my, Abernathy said, his eyes wide with surprise. Great spirals of smoke rose to the ceiling as the goo ate holes in the floor. This is your fault, the witch shouted. I should have turned you into a bat. A great gust of wind shot out of one of the holes and filled the room, blowing in every nook and cranny of the witch's house. Run, the witch howled. Abernathy tore open the front door with the wind blowing at his heels. He ran and ran. He could hear Eldridge yelling incantations at him, but like her spell to make the wind clean the dust from her house, none of these worked either. Abernathy did not stop running until he was far away from Eldridge. By then he was very tired. He sat down on a rock to rest. The wind swirled softly around him. Thank you for setting me free, said the wind. Not only are you clever, but you are a very brave boy. Me? Brave? Abernathy smiled. I wish I could see you safely home, said the wind, but I've got a lot of catching up to do. And one final push, the wind spiraled upwards and was gone. Abernathy returned home a hero. Not only had he stopped the terrible wind from blowing through the village, but from that day onward, the village was never bothered by a terrible wind again. And some say that every year, when the cool autumn breeze blows gently off the mountain, you can still hear the wind whisper the brave boy's name.
Thank you, Donna. And our next reader will be Sherry Meeker. Is everyone hearing us okay in the back of the room?
My name is Sherry Koch. I write a humor column for a weekly paper in Virginia Beach. The title is It's Coming. It's been coming for some time now. The symptoms began over a year and a half ago. I didn't realize it at the time, but now that it's actually here, I've put 2 and 2 together and come up with 30. Yes, 30. Very soon I will reach that age I always feared. That age when everything that worked great for 29 years begins to fall apart, fall off, enlarge, or expand in some cases, just disappear. As I said, the symptoms began some time ago. I remember January of '89, bending over to pick up a sock off the floor. My back decided it was real tired of supporting it. It signaled its intentions by sending excruciating pain from my hip to my head. Screaming in agony, I went down. I stayed down for a week. Through a Darvon-induced haze, I heard voices calling to me. It's coming. It's coming. Solemn faces appeared on the ceiling above my bed. They nodded knowingly. It was coming. The next sign I had that my days were numbered was from my left knee. After 29 years of abuse, the little joint had taken enough. It developed a mind of its own and refused to listen to anything my brain told it to do. My knee and I went through several months of physical therapy before we finally came to an understanding. When it didn't feel like going somewhere, it would let me know by throwing me forward and smashing my face into the ground. Sometimes I forget I ignore the signals my left knee is sending, such as on my visit to Washington, D.C. last year on Earth Day. After spending 3 long, hot hours trying to let Tom Cruise, who was scheduled to speak, catch a glimpse of me. My knee, without any notice, whipped out from under me, catapulted me through the air and delivered me with a thud and a curve. People milled past. I heard them coming. It's coming. Poor thing. It's coming. There have also been little things I thought were insignificant at the time that I now realize were the beginning of the end. Like the time I put the macaroni and cheese in the refrigerator today for an hour. Or the morning I made the bed and forgot to put on the sheets. And then there was the day I shaved both my legs with the safety cap still on the razor. Like I said, little things, I paid them no heed. But then I had the dream. Nightmare is actually the word for it. Just thinking about it, even in the light of day, sends shivers up my spine. I am driving down a deserted road when suddenly my car stalls. I can't get it restarted. Looking around, I see the only help in sight is a payphone located at the end of a long, long road. All along the road are dirty, sweaty, muscle-bound construction workers. It will be treacherous, but I know I must get to that payphone. So gingerly, I step out of the car. My black satin 5-inch heels sink into the muddy shoulder of the road. Straightening my red spandex micro-mini and checking the seams of my black silk stockings, I slowly begin the dangerous journey down the road of perversion and persecution. But something is wrong here. Braced for the onslaught of verbal abuse and lewd gestures, I am surprised to see several of the grimy workers stopping their bandanas as I pass. Several of them murmur commands as I slink by. Where are the hey babies and the I'm going to get me some of that? Suddenly, from somewhere behind me, I hear the sound of running feet. Someone is yelling for me to wait up. Turning, I see a 6-foot-tall bronze god headed my way. He is ripping the torn, dirty work shirt from his back. As he gets closer, I can see the glistening glow of beaded sweat in his tiny, rippling muscles. His black wavy hair is tousled from the hot, blowing breeze. Preparing to defend myself, or at least put up a good pretense, I throw back my hair, and in my best long, calm voice, I say, "You talking to me, Stubmother?" "Yes, ma'am," Stubmother replies. I feel his hard, muscular arms around me, touching my bare shoulder blades. His face is only inches from mine. Leaning towards me, his hot, gasping breath echoing in my ear, he whispers, "Here, put on my shirt. Even on a warm day like today, someone your age can still get a shirt." This fine specimen of manhood, I see nothing but respect in his eyes. My face ablaze with mortification, I wrap the smelly shirt around my tired old body, muttering my thanks. As I walk, shoulders slumping, towards the payphone, a voice full of pity reaches my ears. My God, she must be at least 30. All at once, my knee shoots out from under me, and I fly through the air, twisting my back. I grab for the phone. At this point, my terrified screams always wake me up. But that voice, that sad, knowing voice echoes from the walls. The words ring in my aching head. My God, she must be at least 30. So I take this time to ask all of you who have turned 30 and lived to tell about it, and all of you that are approaching that fateful age and think you will surely die, light a candle for me, say a prayer, or just stop at some point during your busy day for a moment of silence. But don't waste what little time you have worrying about me. I've got big plans for my birthday. I'm going to sit at home, pick lint balls out of all my new wrinkles, and reminisce about the good old days when I had complete control over my body and men still treated me with a little disrespect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon. That was delightful. Our next reader will be Mr. Jerry Southwell.
Like the four previous speakers, I was going to read something original by me, but unlike the four previous speakers, I'm totally bereft of talent. So I will just read Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll from Through the Looking Glass. It's done by popular demand, and what that means is my office mate Diana leaned back in her chair and said, "Will you read Jabberwocky again?" So here it is. "'Twas brilligan, the slithy toes did gyre and gimble in the weeb. All mimsy where the burrow goes, and the moan wraths out grave. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws to catch. Beware the jub-jub bird, and shun the frumious bandersnatch. He took his horrible sword in hand, long times of a noxome foe he sought. So he rested by the tum-tum tree, and stood a while in thought. And as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock, with eyes of flame, came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burbled as it came. 1-2, 1-2, and through the horrible blade went snicker-snack, and he left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy, O frabjous day, callow Calais, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toes did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy where the burrow goes, and the moan wraths out grave.
Thank you, Lewis Carroll. Our next reader will be Ms. Deborah Gaskell. Deborah.
Hi, my name's Deborah Gaskill, and what I'm going to read to you is one of the first things I ever had published. I'm very proud of it. It was published first in the AKA Writer Anthology from the Nutmeg Press at Manchester, Connecticut Community College. It was also published in Chips Off the Writer's Block, a San Francisco beginning writers magazine. It's called Coming Out as a Writer. I believe I was 14 when I first told my mother I wanted to become a writer when I grew up. She was not pleased. As a very sensible person, firmly rooted in the belief that one should have 3 meals a day and steady income in order to be successful, she reacted in much the same way had I elected to come out of the closet rather than crawl into a typewriter case. Later, I was chagrined to learn that one could be underfed and have a paid job. One didn't have to starve simply for one's art. One could work for a bank. You need to do something practical for a living, something real, Mother said. Then she cried, begged, pleaded, and when I would not change my mind, rolled her eyes and left the room. How could I explain to her the feelings that came over me when faced with a blank sheet of paper and a No. 2 pencil? That my need to fill blank paper with whatever repellent fiction, as Harry Crews calls it, had nothing to do with any other need, such as food or shelter, that I may have. The yarns and narratives in my head cried out for a release, which was only possible through pen, paper, or typewriter. Writing was just something that I just had to do. During my adolescence, I wrote constantly, whatever inspiration hit me and on whatever I could find. It wouldn't stop, no matter what I did, no matter how I tried to curb the urge. I wrote poems, short stories, books. The characters would appear in my mind's eye, magically alive and of their own volition, begged to be given a more permanent home. In high school, I shunned the established school paper to begin with other classmates, the alternative underground paper. I kept diaries that involved angst-filled volumes with the terrible trauma of growing up. My first kiss, my parents' divorce, and other teenage traumas. On the other hand, my father, with his tenuous hold on reality, encouraged my writing. Mother disarmed that faint praise with, well, we all know what kind of shape your father's in. When he appeared at my wedding claiming to be Robert E. Lee, I had to wonder, would he have encouraged me if I said I wanted to sprout wings and fly? After a few years without encouragement, I simply stopped writing. The urge has never left, although for years I left it. I listened to people who are more firmly rooted in the realities of the world and turned my back on what I really wanted to do. Now I am 30. This was published a long time ago. No. With 2 years of practical college behind me, majoring in soulless things like accounting and management, with 2 children and 2 boxes of diaries and half-scribbled stories and steno pads occupying a shelf in my front hallway closet. I am lucky to have a husband who, while he supported me on any number of harebrained endeavors as I searched for what I thought would be a true vocation, finally had to ask me, what is it that you really want to do when you grow up? The only answer I could come up with was that same one I gave my mother some 16 years before. I want to be a writer. I had come full circle. I just had to write. Something in me demands that I do. There's no other explanation. Then do just that, he said. I put our daughter into daycare 3 days a week, took the phone off the hook, and began. The first few months were as though I had discovered a relative accidentally buried alive. I was frantically scraping and clawing at the sod over the pine box with bare hands, trying to dig up the casket fast enough before what life that casketed person had was gone. Had I left what talent I may have had in the back of the closet so long that it had died, I had to find out. Fortunately, there still was life in the body inside the pine box. I could still write. Ideas for stories, opening paragraphs, and offbeat characters poured out, and boy, did it feel good. The purchase of a word processor a few months later, ostensibly to help my husband write his master's paper, opened more creative doors. To my knowledge, Greg has only sat down at the computer once in 5 months. While he did, I was like an addict waiting for a fix. I hovered around him and repeatedly asked him if he was done yet. I sat behind him at the desk, jiggling my leg until the Tropicana can filled with pencils atop the desk rattled. Here, take it. I can't work with you hovering around me like a mother hen. In disgust, Greg got up and, to my knowledge, has not returned. To be truthful, family members' eyes still glaze over when I tell them that I have begun writing. I always get a good laugh when I call you Deb, says my brother, the systems analyst. I really ought to do it more often. Other members respond with a well-tempered huh, and generally change the subject as soon as they possibly can. I'm learning to deal with it. I can't expect everyone to understand while I feel I have to do this. This graphomania of mine is a part of me as much as my eyes and ears. I may never write a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. I may spend my life filling up boxes which will do nothing but gather dust at the back of my closet. But I can die knowing that at least I tried, and that's more than a lot of people can say.
Thank you, Deborah. Our next speaker is Mr. Bob Long.
Laundromat. People come in with their bundles of sins and everything comes out in the wash except the sweat, gland oil, urine, soaked up in what they're wearing. I remember a man who loaded 3 washers with dirty clothes, then stripped off his trousers, shirt, briefs, and undershirt. The manager called the police. Everybody thought he was crazy. Perhaps he was just overly pious. With slippery liquid detergent, they anoint the menstrual rust in crotches, Vaseline stains on sheets, yellow dried semen on handkerchiefs before immersion. When the sweet or sour funk and musk are washed out, clothes come out with a uniform perfume. To write poems here is to know the sum of human possibility. Do you renounce brown stains and yellow collars? Do you renounce off-whites, Do you renounce dirt, blood, oil, grease, and grass stains? We do. It's been 10 years since I've done a public reading of my work. The last time I read that poem was at the Folger Shakespeare Library. I was invited to a reading series there. That poem was also rejected by John Palmer of the Yale Review, who said he almost published it. So my poetry has been rejected by many of the best magazines in the country. For a while, James Merrill and I had a correspondence back and forth, and he read and commented on some of my poetry. This next one was one whose images and language he particularly liked. Country Store. The white frame rises beside a country road you often travel, you always pass into oblivious night. Picked over fruit in long porch-side bins waits for revival in the morning's delivery truck. Cloudy light from whitewashed tin ceiling and walls drops through the door and runs across shoulder gravel like hope. Some night going home you will decide to stop here, but not tonight. Headlights grope through dark. Beyond rickety produce stalls, you would find octagon bars ranked in hierarchs, clothespins, toilet camphor, sardines in tins, bread, playing cards and dice, sacks of dried beans promising order in rows of merchandise and dry goods. Everything you need is here. Dust and shelves float in the incandescent glow above the clerk's head, who sits patiently smoking a Lucky Strike, waiting for you beneath the slow whirring of ceiling fans, the paddle-winged seraphim humming incessant electric praise. This all you need? The usual question turns into its own answer as he takes a bill and pays you back in change. The night you finally stop won't seem so important. Forgotten, it will return quick as starfall. Then you will understand why you stared through windshield corner so queer at the moon, like an exit in Night Wall. In 1981, I made my first and only visit to New Orleans, beginning on Ash Wednesday, and got a chance to see sort of the dregs of Mardi Gras. Nothing quite so sad as the leftovers of debauchery. And I was there to give a retreat for several days to Catholic seminarians in New Orleans. This poem comes from that experience of the old quarter, the French Quarter, Vieux Carré. I think it's sort of pertinent for this week, too. The Passion. A hustler at his corner post wears purple satin hot pants, torn at tit a tight mauve t-shirt, and the smile of an insouciant thug. He teases the buttocks of a friend whose Levi's seat is shredded to white warp. Lent comes to Vieux Carré. The air withers like cigarette breath after coitus. In a local revival, Blanche Dubois, without honor in her own home, parades nightly in frayed negligee, hangs upon the kindness of strangers, gets nailed, Stanley's willing victim. Glazed eyes search stony pavement. Because Christ died for all men, mixed blood cools. Your smudged forehead means piety from Cathedral Saint-Louis, or some trick dropped a joint ash on your forehead and you haven't washed clean for days. Every Friday they will reenact the scene where Jesus is stripped by Romans, whipped, hooted up the street, stripped again in front of his mother and John. As a boy, I walked with them, then looked away, afraid of God's genitals. Later, I watched reverently at the body sprawled on sheets, breathless after the Passion. Sometimes you wear a lover around like a second skin or a faded pair of jeans. You move and breathe like each other. And finally, after many years of not having written, recently I had an opportunity and occasion to write this. Garden. There's one pun I want to explain. I use the word weightless here, and it's spelled W-A-I-T-L-E-S-S, weightless. Garden. Inscrutable, you sequester roots, tubers, rhizomes, beneath matted frost burn and humus, pending sunfall through moist air. Impatient, I lust to be weightless on this earth, would shed tears, spill seed, pour libations, chant prayer, run fingers through grass leaves to force shoots out of season. You will not give up life so easily, while I covet wild berry wet lips from an uncertain summer. Thank you.
When I talk to my parents and family members about reading poetry or something, I don't read what I write. I identify with other people's poetry. Something else came in the mail, and it was sort of reminded me of something. When I was at the University of Maryland, the last year there, we had 8 suicides. And the child of one of the victims, it's hard to say victims, the grandmother just wrote me, has just also committed suicide. So it kind of brought me back to a poem I had read a long time ago that didn't seem to make a lot of sense to me until the first suicide, and it makes a lot of sense today. It's by Frank Horn. It's called Notes Found Near Suicide. To all of you, my little stone sinks quickly into the bosom of this deep, dark pool of oblivion. I've trouble to rest but little, yet these far shores that knew me not will feel the fleeting, furtive kiss of my tiny concentric ripples. To my mother, I came in the blinding sweep of ecstatic pain. I go in the throbbing pulse, making space. In the eons between, I piled upon you pain upon pain, ache upon ache. And yet as I go, I shall know that you will want me back, and you will grieve for me. To Catalina, love thy piano, O girl. It will give you back note for note the harmonies for your soul. It will sing back to you the high songs of your heart. It will give, and it will take. To Telly, you've made my voice a ripping laugh, but my heart a crying thing. It's better thus, fleeting kiss, and then the dark. To Wanda, to you so far away, so cold and aloof, to you who knew me so well, this is my last grand gesture. This is my last great effect. And as I go winging through the doors of eternity, does that thin sound I hear, the sound of your heart? To James, do you remember how you won the race, that last race, how you flung your body at the start, how your spikes ripped the cinders and stretch, and how you catapulted through the take? Do you remember? Don't you think I remember? I lurched with you through that starting hole. Don't you think my sinews tightened at first, those first few strides when you flew into the stretch? Was not all my thrill of 1,000 races in your blood? To the poets. Why do poets like to die and sing raptures to the grave? They seem to think that bitter dirt turns sweet between the teeth. I've lived in hosannas at climbing stars. I've lived and drunk deep the deceptive wine of life. And now, tipsy and reeling from its dregs, I die. Oh, let the poets sing raptures to the grave. Henry. I don't know how I'm going to look when I lie down here, but I should be smiling, Mr. Bisley. You and I have studied together the knowledge of the ages and lived the life of science, matching discovery for discovery. And yet, in a trice, with a small explosion of this little machine in my hand, I shall know all that Aristotle, Newton, Lavoisier, Galileo could not determine in their entire lifetimes. And the joke of it is, Henry, I beat you to it. To the one who called me nigger. You are power, and you send ships hurtling shore to shore. You are vision, you cast your sight through eons of space, from world to world. You are brain, you throw your voice endlessly from ear to ear. You are soul, and yet you falter at the widening, yawning chasm, light to black. To Alfred, I've grown tired of you and your wife sitting there with your children, those little bits of you running around your feet, and you two so calm and cold together. It's really better to lie here and sensate than to see new life creep upon you, cold and calm, sitting there. And to you, all my life you have told me that you would save my soul, that only by kneeling in your house and eating of your body and drinking of your blood could I be born again. And yet, one night, in the tall black shadow of a windy pine, I offered up the sacrifice of body upon the altar of her breast. You who conceive without ecstasy or pain, can you understand that I knelt last night in your house and ate of your body and drank of your blood and thought of her?
Hi. I'm Fred Henney, and I'm a teacher in the English department here at Thomas. I was going to read about 6 poems, but I decided to read 3, and one of them is mine, and 2 of them are by my wife. The first one is my attempt, not my first attempt, but an attempt that was really stimulated by Diana Martin's asking me to try to write a poem. And I really appreciate that, Diana. Almost 40 years ago, I was let loose in a Lockheed Shooting Star fighter jet to see if I could really fly it by myself. And I'll never, ever forget the excitement and exhilaration as my heart was pounding so, and I pushed that throttle forward and raced down the runway. In the following 10 years, I flew many fighter planes at altitudes up to about 10 miles, which is nothing today, of course. And of course, many more times between 6 and 8 miles up in the air. And I still felt that exhilaration all those years, that excitement all those years. And I recall the beautiful sight of our Earth from 6, 8, and 10 miles, day and night. And I always wanted to find some way to put that into words. I don't think I've done it, but I've tried, and here is my attempt. It's called High, Flying. You may have read the poem High Flight. This is High, Flying. As your dome, glowing, eyes bright, searching, hands clenched, tingling, earth faded, dropping, re-enwombed, semi-fetal, oxygen inrushing, Darth Vader-like, sternum heaving over pounding core, azure into cobalt deepening, reflected solar brilliance dazzling, senses tactile, oral, of savor, unyielding, id unleashed, soaring. My wife is a writer, and after 20 years of teaching in Paul Burbank Elementary School, she has had her opportunity to do all the kind of writing she likes to do, and she's written many poems and short stories. And we did publish this past year her Calvert and His Adventures, which is available at the Thomas Nelson Bookstore, the Old Hampton Bookstore, and I've heard that people really like that. And here is one of her poems. She has poems full of emotion and some full of humor. First, an emotional one. Untitled. It wells up in me and stares me in the face. I gnash my teeth and bite my tongue. Words want to flow from a serpent tongue to lash and shred and hew my adversary to the ground. A pounding heart strikes at my breast. Trembling, I unleash my anger. And I'd like to leave you with this final thought. It's called Love Song. Whisper sweet nothings into my ear. Passionate words I love to hear. Tell me I'm your own true love. Coo at me, my turtle dove. Twine your arms around my waist. Kiss me, love, but not in haste. Let's blend our bodies, become as one. Life and love are so much fun. Whoops, don't tell me we're done.
The first poem I'm going to read is called Blue Slippers, and it's about a state of being. I've lost myself beneath the trundled bed where dust walls growl and moss my fat, stooped knees. Where did I leave me? Squat, sit a spell, and stare at me rocking, restless. Comfort me. Where's my second guess? The meaning of my forgetfulness. Perhaps my ear is crooked, like antique pages in a book. No, I'm sure I've splashed sounds again. Just pain-stained I am, in ruse of red amoebas, ever-changing. Have you seen me? Lace thesaurus, dine on every symbol, swallow universal minds. I must be there somewhere, looking like a tree denuding before the eyes of fall, shedding leaves and layers upon winter's wetted gauze. There must be new leaves coming, or have I just gone bald? Moan, sad monsoon, hurl your sail, Plutoed quest. I rock and roll, in roll after roll of unhappiness, until my squall, like blackbirds, rise and dive and jazz and razz and flock of feathered midnight. Melodious, melancholy blue, I cry for me, you know. I mean, you knew. I've lost myself. My screeching ears ring like tundra rocks, blowing honey, ebbing delicate tides of belief into the arc of my lost wax. I am forgotten, a cavity of bronzed resemblance standing. Myself like Madras bleeds, stewed beef dripping, simmering, oozing off the spit down onto the checkered trial of my arriving, bubbling, fizzing, bellowing like cannon smoke. Such caustic firing, my search of self. So I surge shuttered fringes, disembark from ice-cubed reasoning, and grasp the real from behind the real, and hold back the bill glass lining of life's sublime blinding, and retrieve my slippers, fuzzy blue. Put them on, then move. Moving on, I find you. The second poem is what I want out of life. It's called Bittersweet. I ching, yin and yang, and taste buds on my tongue declare the world is bittersweet and robs itself of fun. For if in inactivity there's action to be found, it means the pleasures that I take are only half the round. And if in action I do rest, I've not experienced all, for half the sweet is bitter, and I want the whole darn ball. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Celeste T. Johnson. I worked in the counseling center here for 11 years, and I got a certificate in early childhood education in 1988. And I really like children, and when I like to write about them and think about them all the time. The title of my poem is The Big Oak Tree. Over in the schoolyard stood a big oak tree. Children are running and playing as far as you can see. The autumn wind is blowing. The leaves are gently falling. Not a sound do they make as they float to the ground. Just a few leaves left. The rain will make them wet. Wondering what's the reason? Knowing it's the season. As the sun goes down at the end of the day, the children leave and go on their playful way. Winter makes the peacock sleep for a long, long time. Then comes spring, and the peacock is awakened, for it knows the perfect realm is time. Thank you.
Most days I pick up a pen and sometimes I even finish something. These are some things I write. The first one is called Flight of Fancy. Bill Burton was angry. He hated his life, duller he thought than an old butter knife. So boring, in fact, it was downright frightening. As thrilling as a rainstorm without thunder or lightning. Existence without meaning, a life with no worth. One of the living nobodies that crowd up the earth. In 40 years of living, he thought it a shame. Accomplishment zero. He wanted some fame. His life to this point was a sad waste of time, and that in itself was a terrible crime. No family or friends, not even a pet. I'm just one of the faithless million people. One of the faithless millions people see and forget. That no one will remember me is my greatest fear. I want everyone to know that Bill Burton was here. For a chance at some fame, I'd sell my soul. A place in prosperity is my ultimate goal. For days, weeks, and months, he thought of some schemes that would help him achieve his fame-making dream. One day it came to him, even Bill was surprised. What about suicide, nationally televised? If I'm going to go, then this I can use as my chance to appear on the national news. No razor or pills done in the quiet of night. I'll go out with a bang with the crowd and spotlights. He notified the local TV stations by sending them RSVP invitations. Then he stood on the ledge of the tallest building downtown and yelled, "I'm taking the quickest way down." A crowd gathered below for his deadly flight. Bill thought this is great and moving just right. But he waited for the camera crews to arrive, thinking that's the only reason I'm still alive. For 2 hours he waited until it was clear that those TV crews would not appear. Where on the street there once was a mob stood one lone man whom Bill heard sob. "Things can get better, son. Come on down. Let's talk this over here on the ground." As Bill moved, his foot slipped in the poop of a bird. The news crew rolled up just as Bill hit the curb. They interviewed the man on the street who called it a waste, but they never mentioned Bill Burton or showed his face. The next one is called Path to Glory. 3 brothers grew up in poverty, hearing those ads to be all you can be. Different paths they chose at different times. Education, sports, and one chose crime. The athlete saw sports as his way to fame. Wherever he went, fans yelled out his name. His face was front page at the Daily News. The team he played for just would not lose. His brother felt that sports was much too hard. He made quick cash dealing drugs on the boulevard. There was money in jewels, all the clothes he could buy, selling to anyone who wanted to get high. Education was the way the third brother chose. He knew he had picked the unglamorous road. Maybe fame and lots of money he would never get, but a college degree he would never regret. The athlete got a scholarship to the best college in state. His prospects for the future were better than great. All he did was play ball. He never attended class, but as long as they won, he was sure that he passed. His senior year was the one they all anticipated. Best player in the nation, said Sports Illustrated. Third game of the season, he broke a bone in his shin. The doctor said, "Sorry, son, you'll never play again." Now he was baggage to be tossed aside, no longer a star getting a free ride. He doesn't matter anymore, was the coach's views. He's been replaced and forgotten like yesterday's news. He said, I'd have been great if I just had a chance, but I'm back where I started, a victim of circumstance. The drug dealer thought he didn't have a problem in sight. He was the big man in the city. Everything was right. He had women and cars, a penthouse with a pool, but a proverb said money soon parts from a fool. He was using his product, buying jewelry and furs. Soon he became his best customer. He forgot the first thing that people must choose. If you're planning to sell, you must never use. Soon he was back where he started, not a dime to his name. The drugs he'd been using had frazzled his brain. The one who chose school finally got his degree, then his master's and doctorate, now he's a PhD. He came back home and started a little store. Then as it prospered, he opened a few more. And the thing really special about what he did was he made his employees the neighborhood kids. He thought if you have something, it's your job to share, to give hope for a future when no future is there. And all of those kids who never had hope, now they had a role model who wasn't into athletics or dope. Someone to be like who put them on track, then they could succeed and give something back. He would always tell the kids who respect he had earned, stay in school for they can never take away that which you have learned. Thank you.
I want to read an untitled poem written by Alfred Reynolds, who has passed away. An empty spiral notebook on his desk, the armed desk kind that pupils use in school. He felt himself some antique sort of fool for trying this adventure in burlesque. He sat in steep bewilderment at first, wondering if inside the rest would laugh at the roly-poly sight of the Falstaff in school instead of slaking his great thirst to 20-year-old songs at some dank bar. Alas, there's no escape. They're filing in, those youthful seekers after places he had been in times long past. He wonders who they are, and if they understand why this old fool would want to go and sit again in school. This is something I've written. It's a protest. It's called Tail Down Dog. Tail down dog moves slowly, veiled in secret eyes follow a blood-red sun. He rests in dust and hangs his tongue, a pitiful street clown, as boys throw rocks and curses. Mothers scold and call the humane society. Tail down dog is dying and smiles a canine smile, for foolish men forget. His is the first soul they meet on final human journeys. The guard at the red gate, tail down dog. And this is called Barbed Wire and Barbie Dolls. I almost saw my daughter today. Not how she is, but how she will be. Her barbed wire cage slit for just an instant, a blinding, radiant instant. Saw my daughter today, stiff Barbie doll in skin-tight clothes, looking like millions of other Barbie dolls with pouting lips and secret eyes. Looked at myself in cracked mirror glass. My smile looked like the wrong end of a gun, and I laughed. Barbie dolls don't change, and barbed wire only rusts. Age and time are good teachers. Infinity's coolest joke. Barbie dolls reproduce themselves. The last one I wrote in Diane's class, is called Blue. It was an assignment for colors. Blue is cool. White is nice, but blue is cool. There are blue eyes, oceans of boys, names and places and toys. You can be blue if you want to. Hear blue if you sing. Feel blue, it feels like yellow and green. Even taste blue in berries, wine, and jam. Up is blue. Down is blue, generic color. Blue is cool, white is nice, but blue is cool.
I originally had a different idea of what I was going to do here, but the other day I received a phone call from my friends, and she told me that she just recently was raped, and after learning this, I did a little look up on what's going on, and apparently in D.C. it was stated in the Washington Post that rape's gone up 63%. That attempted rapes and reported rapes. In Maryland, rape's gone up 23%. In Virginia, rape has gone up 17%. This poem, which I wrote last night, is, I guess, sort of me trying to understand a rape and how unfortunately people perceive rape. So it's called Rape on Street No Light. Street no lights. Street no lights. Heavy wet boot steps around every corner. Well, why was she out so late, walking alone at a time like that? It was 7 o'clock, night on street no lights. Research had to be done. She was looking for mobility. There are many sharp turns on street no lights. You must feel. We all must feel. It's just no place for a woman. Was she wearing pants? She was wearing pants and she has short hair? Ah, they must have thought she was a dyke. They were only trying to convert her. There are many dried out bugs, dreaming, hallucinating of sunlight. Things seem to come and go on street no lights. There's much sorrow felt here. Oh, so she was one of those businesswomen. Well, men get jealous, you know, well, it's a man's world and it's no place for women. Men frown upon that sort of thing. She must have been a lesbo. Yep, some butch dyke walking home from her corporate job to her girl who's got dinner all hot and ready for her. She's just asking for it. Street No Lights has many sharp turns. There is somewhat of an empty feeling placed here. Yep, she was just asking for it. She should have known. It just isn't a place to walk alone at night, and a woman can do nothing about it. Excuse me, did anyone see? Can anyone hear? Can anyone describe? Did anyone listen? Will anyone try? There are many scars placed here. Excuse me. Open your eyes, open your mouth, open your ears, open your mind, open your shout, fill your hands. There's much healing to be done here. That's that. This is not a poem. One of my friends, Ian McKay, who's in a band called Fugazi, wrote a song called Suggestion, and it's going to sound really lame because it's a song, not a poem. But basically, I'd like to read across the lyrics. Again, it's a man writing a poem of rape, and men usually don't feel rape. Occasionally they do, though. Trying to understand rape as a woman, and a man trying to do that, that inspired me in itself, this song, to write a poem of rape. So, it's a hardcore band, so a lot of these lyrics are meant to be yelled, but I'll spare you that. Why can't I walk down the street for your suggestion? Is my body my only trade in the eyes of men? In the eyes of men? Well, guess again. There lays no reward in what you discover. You spent yourself, boy, watching me suffer. Suffer your words, suffer your eyes, suffer your hands, suffer your interpretation of what. Suffer your interpretation of what it is to be a man. Well, guess again. She does nothing to deserve it. He looks at her because he wants to observe it. We sit back like they taught us. We keep quiet like they taught us. He just wants to prove it. She does nothing to remove it. We don't want anyone to mind us. We play the role that they assign us. She does nothing to conceal it. He touches her because he wants to feel it. We blame her for being there. We are all guilty. I planned on reading Marge Piercy's poem, The Rape, but our library doesn't have any Marge Piercy, so wish I could, but I can't. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm pleased to hear so much metered verse coming out of these people today. I'm a retired journalist, and I prefer to write in metered verse, at least cadence verse, if not always metered. I think I believe, like Robert Frost, that writing free verse is a bit like playing tennis without a net. I brought a number up today, but I'll read you one serious one and one funny one. The first one is a light verse. Light verse is hard to write, by the way. It's almost harder to write than serious verse. This one's called Piping Plover Nesting Season. And I need a little preface on the front to explain why I wrote this. So I've got this right under the title. The Fish and Wildlife Service, operators at the Chincoteague National Wildlife Refuge, will close the south end of the beach about 3.5 miles to all humans during the piping plover nesting season, March 15 to August 31. Similar areas in other refuges closed during nesting season produce an average of 2 birds per nesting pair. The area to be closed at Chincoteague produces 0.19 birds per nesting pair. That's from the newsletter of the Northern Neck of Virginia Audubon Society. I got that newsletter. So here's what that inspired me to write. Oh, blighted Chincoteague, whose nesting pairs of piping plovers produce but faulty chicks. Look over the Northern Neck nesting stats. Stats can't get much worse than that. 0.19 birds per nesting pair. Now that's a nest that's nearly bare. Chicks are born, but 1/5 there to those poor piping plover parents. Cursed by the Chincoteague connection, these chicks are less than chick perfection, less than natural selection. They're a tiny beak, a wing, perhaps a foot, but everything points to an 0.19 freak. Marshall plover, poor and weak, as Will himself would have said. Sans teeth, sans eyes, sans voice to sing, poor chick, sans nearly everything. Here's a more serious one that celebrates my age, I guess. It's called Paradox. If you listen for the meter in it, maybe somebody could figure out what it is, because it's a very strictly metered form. So somebody tell me what it is after I read it. Paradox. The dimmer sight becomes, the more I see, yet count the days more short and nights more long for bringing light to darkness. Part of me loves lassitude of age, while part is strong, counseling rage against decrepitude, challenging age to sing the songs of youth. I know my mere age is dude. If that is wisdom, age at last is truth. 5 funereal themes, breakthrough masses for the living, not the dead. I choose to see dim earth illuminate and pass into a brighter star I'll never lose. Thank you, Father, for leading me to find that insight owes much to becoming blind. That's true.
Strongly iambic.
Iambic tetrameter?
Definitely, but it's a strict form.
Yeah.
Was it tetrameter?
No, that was pentameter. That was an iambic pentameter. The Chincoteague one, by the way, was in tetrameter form. This is in 5 feet, but it's a strict form that you ought to know. Shakespeare wrote a lot of them, so John Donne.
Wish I had an Ogden Nash Award in my pocket for the Plover poem. Great. I write a lot about cycles and changes from those cycles and within those cycles. I found myself once on a winter solstice working in a pottery shop, which happened to be a gazebo right out on the edge of a cow pasture. And this is what I saw and felt and thought.
A barren tree with barren sky behind, with shredded bark and broken limbs, apart and gray, its gay of autumn gone, its leafy loss, now down and crushed, is brown, is crumbled into stain upon the ground, and from the trunk lies spread the limb's circumference round. What stands is gesture, twisted branches raised on high, defying frost, defying freeze, defying even death, that space behind the blankness of the sky, and clutching at the narrow band and brevity of light. The sure, mortal waning of the sun, pursued by cold Orion, warmth spent, rain undone, and this year's course from flash to ember run. A spark is needed now, some brilliance in this dark. It comes. A cardinal flashing crimson bright refutes the dimness, warms the whole, puts off the night, and firmly to the landscape pins the light. The colored leaf shine joy of autumn is not lost. It turns to meal that mixes with the roots that feed into the trunk, the living warmth that fights the frost, that feeds the soul, till bud time break, till leaf be green, till only death be cold. Got a number of poems that start as a group out here where the water and the land meet at the change point, and it's important to me, and I'm trying over the space of my allotted writing time, whatever that might be, to put together a sort of travelogue across this continent. I was born in the heartland, and the ocean was a new phenomenon to me when I went down to where land and water joined and wrote this poem called Genesis out here on Buckroe Beach, under the suspicious eye of a policeman. And where begin but the western shore of a proud and virile ocean at the sea marge, the surf fringe, the phosphorescent white surge, the sea rush upward, the sea thrust up on land. The bones of sailors, the wash of crusted decks, blood of giant sea monsters, stew of a million and more millions of lives boiling in the surge, the great urge shoreward. 13 bells for a drowned man, his earring graces a seaman's hand, and the best of the ocean's watery dance tolls him and rolls him ashore. An ivory ankh on the drowned man's bones, in the moan and the roll of the sea's heart beats, in the crash and the sizzle of the wash, and the bubble of the waves as they sponge themselves in the sand. This ivory ankh by a drowned man's hand came to land in the vital urge of the seaborne salt, and it came in the light, in the green glow, white, to land, to the sand where the trade of the two worlds is made. In the hollow roar and the swoosh of the surf, the ocean dropped it, tickled it up again, then at last laid it a rest on the brown wet sand, and the waves with their green glow light withdrew. Rock and sleep, Archimedes, roll and sleep, thy part's been played, repose, be grave. On that sand, a boundary, a few yards, a half-mile beyond, the new world's muscle and latent strength grip firm, and the ocean's reach gives up, withdraws into itself. That boundary, the sea pushed up and the land rolled down, mix the waste of worlds, where the heat of day from the potent two forges something new in the whir and the tear of air things feeding on sea things. And there, putrescence, sunrot, grassy decay, and flies for midwives. The first great step is done. On 95 going north to Washington, there is a sign that tickled my curiosity for a number of years, and I finally gave in and followed it. It said Jackson Shrine, and I wondered what kind of secular shrine the state of Virginia had erected. So I went, and twice in my life I've been at a historic site where there are actually ghosts walking around me. Both times after the Park Service had closed up and gone home. Both times again, if there had been a policeman, I would have been under a suspicious eye or two. But this is called Flowers at Fairfield. I had the place to myself. It was misty, warm, played their little tape, which ended, "In this house the Confederacy also died." It's the place where Jackson was taken, Stonewall Jackson, wounded mortally, and it goes this way. It's about this time of year, too. In sun-hot, sun-bright dogwood time in early May, Confederate of pain, at Fairfield, Jackson lay engaged with cold pneumonia's brute campaign and counted off towards Fredericksburg, each northbound train. The amputee cut off from battle roll, disarmed, he watched the red-tipped blossoms pall, vulnerable as honor. Tired, weak, he struggled through that bloodied flower week, the spirit of his men at Wilderness and Spotsylvania Town. The fever charged. He saw the dogwood blossoms sicken, watched their red turn brown. Companion victims of the heat's relentless victory, the southern spring and Stonewall turned to history. He watched the flowers blur, then fall. He watched the flowers blur, then casualties of casual battle fall. On Sunday, death told up rich spoils, all. This one is somewhere between autobiography and ideal. Got some time to work it out. In the Bhagavad Gita, there's a point where the most noted warrior of his generation, Arjuna, is facing battle and gets out there between two armies and cannot fight. Some of you may see this, or have seen this last night on the PBS production. And Krishna says to him, what you do is act in your own nature without regard for the consequences. Not without regard, without being attached to the consequences. And this poem is called Letting Go. I hadn't read the Gita when I wrote it, but I heard an echo last night. It's called Letting Go. Simple as hairballs on shower drain traps or nail clippings in a wastebasket. That simple, yes, and he did it. He let go. Friends, old photos, memories, women in jeans with tight thighs, philosophers, mother, father, sister, neighbors, eyeglasses, the dust in the hallway, his ideas, breath, the darkened, star-strung sky outside, cars, his own sex, music, sounds, and walking, the next moment and the prior, the final evanescent boundaries of himself gone. Quite gone, all let go, all their own, no longer his, simply none of them. Gone without emotion in the instant of awareness, before the muscle pulled to turn his head with the knowledge. He had let them go forever independent, quit, apart from him. He walks among them, how he loves them, all their freedom. And finally, a little heresy to close this. In Hamlet, there's a scene where Polonius comes on the pretend insane Hamlet reading a book. And he says, "What are you reading, my lord?" And Hamlet responds to him, "Words, words, words." And I've pondered on that line every time I read the play, and particularly when I have to teach it. And currently, I see a lot of horror in there if you folks are interested in literature, because I think I found something nasty about words in this poem. But I'll read it anyhow. It's from Hamlet, Act 2, Scene 2, line 194. Words, words, words is the title. All books, all psalms and speeches, all volumes, lectures, and notes, all chiseled in stone notices, newspaper headlines, posters, all scriptures and philosophies, all vows, all poems, all thoughts. Only words, words, words. Words that dance, hunching their seductive thighs at the mind's eye, until our minds panting, they drag us into is-not's bright illusion. Intuition and act frozen into something already past tense. Fallen leaves, dead letters. Hey, Dan, I don't like that.
January 28, 1986, because I normally don't watch TV. And that morning, I turned on the TV set for whatever reason, I don't know, and a tremendous explosion took place. And I sat down immediately and wrote this, and I submitted it to Christopher Newport College's Writers' Conference that year, and I was told it was too soon for something like this, so save it and submit it again. So I rewrote it and I submitted it this year. Forth they strode, gladiators strut. They preened, we beamed, how great they are. Some applauded, some cheered them on, claiming, way to go, no matter that they could not hear. Then, with arrogant fanfare, honored, already gloried, launched their venture into that vast space, to explore a part of his greatness with the tiny sum of theirs. With a flame and a roar it soared, streaking briefly with Titan grandeur, in a steady programmed direction, never reaching its millennium, because he thrust out his hand and stayed the course. Gotcha. Gone the glory, gone our heroes, gone that dream.
I'm so pleased to be here today. I am here a little while and yet again a little while because I teach here from time to time. And that's Shakespeare too. I don't write about usual conventional things. I'm not a confessional poet. You won't find me turning out my soul like a song. To give you an idea, and I have only 2 ideas here, you better wear them well. I have an idea about a man making love to a mermaid. As if that were not enough, I've planned each detail, each move, and she turned out more like a fillet. It was very dull. Then I thought I'd do what you all know writers are prone to do. We steal. Nothing to do with plagiarism now. It's called illusion. So, since you all know, have on the tips of your tongues Andrew Marvell's To His Coy Mistress, I'd like to present to you To His Coy Mermaid. Had we but towels enough, this fish, so newly caught, would be quite a dish. Not, as you think, with lemon and spices, but with a woman's coy devices. She by the Indian Ocean's side shouldst cockles find. That's from Marvel, shouldst. Shouldst cockles find. I'd search the tide for seaweed to bedeck her hair, and barnacles already there. My piscatory love should bloom each time she splashes me with spume. And 100 years should go to tell of how I'm captured by her tail, or mirrored in each shining scale. 200 to adore her bosoms, pale and puckered like green gauge plums. But at my back I ever hear O'Grady's fish market hurrying near. The plate's a fine and fragile place, but not for women of her race. I know what has been said so well, in 3 days fish and company smell. Now, therefore, while the sheen of spray moistens her parts for amorous play, and while her willing gills transpire with little bubbles, who asked for fire? Let us roll all our limbs and all my fishing gear into one ball. Examine her from head to flipper. God willing, I may yet find her zipper. 1987. Thank you, Dr. Victor Thompson and all who had anything to do with that. Our colleagues, as Mr. Bruno may have indicated, and Mr. Haney, have a great influence on what we write or do not write sometimes. At another institution, a colleague of mine, a learned African colleague, asked me to write him a spring poem. I know he was thinking of the flowers that bloom in the spring, trella, and birdies. He wanted a spring poem. So, for Dr. Gabriel Ruambika, spring comes to Professor Rusk. And I want you to know that the historical names in here are all garbled up. I didn't have a reference book when I wrote it. I just did enough for the sake of the rhyme. The full Professor Tyrus Rusk of ancient history sat at his desk, contemplating yellowed texts of various Antinomian sects, prevalent among the early Hittite and Dionysius the Areopagite. Unknown to him, a potent spore blew in and landed on the floor. Having no better place to go, it gently rolled beside his toe. From spore to tendril and thence to vine, it grew in less than half the time it takes to read this humble rhyme. Curling around his toes, it grew up into his ankles too. And while he nodded, nearly napping, his toes began tappity-tapping, as if he listened to melodies played only by the Hesperides. "Cease!" shouted Professor Rusk, who tended to be dry and brusque, but did not tend to address his toes for reasons that nobody knows. The little green vine, no flash in the pan, that dances as often as dance it can, grew briskly upward, clockwise turning, until it reached his seat of learning, where it caused sensations of tickling and burning. Rusk sat on his chair as one on fire, consumed with many a strange desire to subdivide kingdoms of ancient Thrace and build a theocracy in their place, such as tried by the Emperor Valerian, Aristarchus, and the Proto-Cimmerian. Fortunately, at this moment in time, Professor Rusk forgot the vine because he just found exaltation in an interlinear citation, proving that the Upanishad had been translated in Hyderabad. I know you'll all be glad about that. The vine progressed above the waist, approached his chest, turned to taste the heart. A grand and immediate shiver possessed the professor from lungs to liver, with the force that only a bomb can deliver. Vision of 1,000 dryads mingled with the moister naiads, and of the rich exotic places inhabited by gods and graces, veils about their forms and faces, tantalized the full professor. Sanity grew less and lesser. "It's something I ate," and he mused with a tilt of his head, but the vine had no reason to wilt. It climbed without suckers, it climbed without claws, it climbed without hesitation or pause. To the top of his chin, to the top of his nose, to the top of his head, where naught ever grows. Balancing lightly on the freckles beneath, the vine encircled his head like a wreath. Before his eyes flashed Thucydides, pursued by the Eumenides, each one promising endless joy by turning into Helen of Troy, with honey dripping from her lips, that face which launched the 1,000 ships. "Hence," he cried, "begone, you varlet,
I have never liked that harlot. He snatched the vine leaves from his head, stamped on them till they were dead, threw them out, then turned instead to matters infinitely better, Suetonius's long-lost letters, hidden underneath the crumbs of yesterday's dried sticky buns.
This is a true story, more or less, but like Mark Twain once said, there was things which he stretched. And as a little bit of background on it, I grew up in a Scandinavian family. I always wondered why it was they didn't get along. You'd think that Danes, Norwegians, and Swedes would all have something in common. But in fact, it turns out to be a war story. Right? This is about family, but it's a family war story. And the title is called In Search of Norman Rockwell's Brooklyn. Whenever Carl Peterson went to New York City with his family, he hoped that someone would suggest dinner at the Three Crowns. The food didn't particularly interest him. In fact, the mere thought of eating those disgusting raw seafood treats made him feel sick to the stomach. But he wanted to see if there really was some place on this earth where Swedes, Danes, and Norwegians could eat together in peace. He once meekly suggested to his Danish grandfather that a visit to the Three Crowns might be fun, but he never made that mistake again. The Three Crowns, indeed, where were the Swedes when we were fighting Hitler? And another thing, you know the time I was in Denmark last summer? I saw a statue of a Danish knight, Olaf Trollef. And you know what? Those Swedes had knocked off one of his arms in 1743. Don't tell me about the Three Crowns. As his grandfather's anger rose like a thunderstorm, Carl decided not to ask him why he had married a Swede. For a Swede, his grandmother had always seemed like a nice person. But maybe he was wrong. Maybe she was really a Valkyrie. On weekends, Carl thought that maybe the whole family belonged to one of those operas where everybody got killed. Every Sunday after church, the family piled in Grandfather Peterson's Oldsmobile and headed for the war zone at Aunt Kirsten's home in Brooklyn. Every Sunday was about the same, a fierce skirmish followed by an uneasy peace. Carl dreaded these visits so much that he kept a picture of Norman Rockwell's Thanksgiving in his head to give him hope and courage as they plunged out of the angry mouth of the Holland Tunnel. In his mind's eye, a smiling grandfather was carving a golden brown turkey as his family looked on approvingly. The grandfather stood at the head of a long table filled with good American food, corn on the cob, mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, and not a single face looked the least bit disappointed or unhappy. But as Carl saw the sign for Canal Street, he suddenly felt the cold air of a winter Sunday seeping through the chinks of the Oldsmobile, and he knew the trouble was near. As usual, they would be late. Although they'd been there dozens of times before, his grandfather always managed to get lost somewhere between the New York side of the Holland Tunnel and Canal Street. As they drove up and down those Manhattan streets in search of Brooklyn, Carl knew that his Aunt Kirsten was at that very moment setting out the last platter of some Swedish delicacy or a smorgasbord, and Uncle Sven was taking his post at the door. He also knew that Uncle Sven would stare at his watch for at least another hour before the Oldsmobile came into sight. Carl had seen it all before. His aunt would be crying because her dinner would be ruined. Uncle Sven would come to her defense, and soon the adults would start hurling insults like the arrows that darken the skies at Agincourt. Carl suspected that somewhere behind all this ill will were hundreds of years of wars between the Danes and the Swedes. In Denmark, Kronborg Castle still guards Helsingør, and just across the Sound there's a Posey Castle in Sweden. These castles have faced each other disdainfully for hundreds of years, just as every Sunday Carl's Uncle Sven, a Swede, faced Carl's grandfather, a Dane, over a smorgasbord. One Sunday, about a week before Christmas, Uncle Sven was standing on the steps of his humble castle on Troy Avenue when the Petersons arrived. As his parents and grandparents filed up the front sidewalk, Carl could see the anger pulsing from Sven's face and heard his first words at a distance. "So, how could you do this? Kirsten is very upset. Her heart is bothering her, and she is lying down. Dinner is ruined, just ruined." Carl prayed that his grandfather would say something nice, but he never did. Like his Viking ancestors, he always arrived armed, ready to fight. So, how do you expect us to be on time to this godforsaken place? You should know better than to set the table before we get here. Then the Petersons advanced like an infantry squad through the breach of the wall and commandeered the tiny living room. As Carl hung up his coat, he could already hear an exchange of insults that sounded like small arms fire. Through the archway to the dining room, Carl could see the table all set with Aunt Kirsten's best lace tablecloth and china. Candles were burning in candelabra, shaped like Viking battle horns, and they radiated an elegant glow over the plates of fruit soup, Epolis fever, blue cheese, pickled herring, and the one item that Carl considered edible, a dried shooty flatbread. No one made a move towards the dining room as the insults of several lifetimes became feather-tipped words. A pair of head shears borrowed some 20 years before, returned improperly repaired, became the main battleground for this Sunday, I think. Yeah, but when I lend them to you, they be like new, but when you bring them back, I throw them in the trash. When he became excited, Uncle Sven's English became more and more like the voices Carl was to hear in Ingmar Bergman's movies. Every now and then there'd be a lull in the battle, and Carl would hope that the family would at last return to the dining room. But Uncle Sven would break the silence with the statement, "There's just one more thing that I want to say." And that one more thing would start the words flying again. Grandmother Peterson said she felt faint, and Carl saw his grandfather helping her slowly up the stairs to bed. During this break in hostilities, Aunt Kirsten said, "And all this good food wasted." Feeling vaguely guilty, Carl sat down at the table all by himself. "This food is sure good, Aunt Kirsten," he said as he scanned those piles of Scandinavian delights, hoping to find some corn on the cob in the midst of the platters of fish. Then he began eating the only thing he really liked, the wheels of flatbread smothered in butter. He broke off big hunks and chewed away as he listened to the voices in the next room rising again to a crescendo like the death scene of an opera. He felt the pleasant mixture of rye and butter warring with his churning stomach. As the words in the next room grew harsher, he ate faster and with greater urgency. After what seemed like hours, he saw his grandmother coming slowly down the stairs, a large woman, stumbling along, clutching at her heart. And he knew the party was over. He could now leave the table and make an honorable retreat. He found his Aunt Kirsten wasted by tears and hugged her. He told her how good the food was, what a good time he had had. Somehow he wanted to make it all up to her and bring her peace. But as he scanned the faces of the adults, he saw no peace, only the anger and hunger of the victims of war. As the Petersons slipped on their coats and made their way to the door, Carl heard his Uncle Sven say, "See you next week." His grandfather replied, "Sure thing." And then Carl was off in the comfort of darkness. He was in the back seat of the Oldsmobile covered with the wool lap blanket and feeling the security of his parents and grandparents leading him through the mazes of Brooklyn into the peace of New Jersey. As he fell asleep, he dreamed of the Three Crowns in a large, elegant room like a scene from Hamlet. Danes, Swedes, and Norwegians were toasting each other with large silver goblets.
I should have gone for all these wonderful writers. I don't care and read all their wonderful things. I just have two very short ones that I've written this semester in Ms. Martin's writing class. They're both untitled. I remember when I was a dark-haired little girl, ringlets dancing down my back, looking up to my father. Daddy would offer 2 worn fingers for me to grasp in my small hand. I do not remember when I let go, sad that I ever did. The next one was playing with some alliteration. Crayon-colored orbs entice excited eyes, lure little tongues to lick lips, draw diminutive dimes to be dropped, tiny test twisting, ceremonious celebration of sucking sugary saliva, a fantasy of flavors for cheap chews. Sweetness swallowed, pursed lips, spit, spearmint.
I thought I had escaped because my name didn't appear. It is true that all of us had a beginning and we all will have an end. And I wrote this little poem called Any Change, ? From the dust we came, in the image of our God. Dust again, same. And the second one, a baby in a womb. And this one is meaningful to me because I was an unwanted baby in a womb whose mother contemplated abortion. But I was also a baby in the womb whose daddy wanted her very much. A baby in a womb. What happens to a baby in a womb when it is aborted? Does it fall like a cake in an oven when the door is slammed? Or does it stick like a key in a lock that is jammed? Maybe it just dries up like a slug that is salted. Whatever, its life is halted. What happens to a baby in a womb when it is unwanted? An unplanned arrival that is allowed survival. Does it sense that it is rejected? Or is this impossible to be detected? Maybe it's just glad to be alive. Whatever, at least it survives. What happens to a baby in a womb when its arrival can't be too soon? Does it sense joy and gladness with no trace of sadness? Or great expectation with no hint of vexation? What will it be? Just wait and see. A doctor? A lawyer? A boy like Tom Sawyer? A ruby? A pearl? A sweet little girl? Whatever, sent from above, it is destined for love.
Our next reader is Orlando Olson. We're here today. Orlando Olson. I had a question. Our next reader is Tim Needham. I'm honored to be able to read 3 of his poems. Tim is sitting right over there. The first poem is Intercourse. I am alone. People see my wheelchair. Notice my poor speech. If they could only see inside me my thoughts, secret desires. Will you spend some time with me? Give me some of that thing that is more precious to me than gold. Let me give you the deepest thoughts and feelings that plague my mind. Touch those parts of you that even you aren't aware of, and feel the feelings of camaraderie and passion within you. Let's bold. Be my friend. Let me be yours too. Tim's second poem is entitled The Dinette. I am round, sturdy, flexible. If it weren't for me, everyone would stay grumpy. I provide a meeting place where people share thoughts, discuss their days. Plans are made around me. Sometimes I have a place to hash out disagreements, drink coffee or tea. I look at the ceiling all day. Sometimes I get dirty, but I am part of the family. Now I am a game board, a place to play checkers or chess or poker, a place to have fun before the family must run. Mr. Needham's third and last poem today is Hungry. A scrawny, pitiful curmudgeon aimlessly trudges down dirty alley, searches intently for any crumb. The smallest bit of food will do. Will he find some? A crust? Can of tuna? He hears hilarity through open windows, the delicious odor of freshly prepared dinner, drifting toward him like a spring breeze from behind locked doors. He feels deserted, lost in solitude. Thank you very much.
pause for a moment?
Certainly, Mom.
Thank you.